Hello, Heath here with X Garage. This is a short video and encouragement, hopefully, to believers wherever you're at. Oftentimes, you'll have someone approach you and say, prove God exists, or I have no reason to believe in God because God hasn't made himself known, etc. Or maybe it's even a believer that's just wrestling just really wrestling with their faith, whether they're a new believer or just going through a really difficult time in their life, or maybe they've had some perpetual sin in their life that's causing doubts in their own walk, etc. So these questions are oftentimes brought up at various stages in life. I think for the believer, though, ultimately they're not questioning God's existence, but they're just wrestling with God. And so out of that wrestling, they begin to ask questions of which they know truly they can't doubt God, because God has made himself known by the Spirit. With all that said, if you're approached with these kinds of questions, you prove God exists, etc., as soon as you begin to entertain that, you've already stepped into Adam's territory. That is, into the territory of suppressing the truth of God, and there's no way out of that. You're just going to prove you're working on their assumption that God has not manifestly made himself known. So the question itself is starting on the wrong premise. It's assuming that God has not made himself known. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky above are his handiwork. All of creation proclaims the attributes of God. His eternal power and divine nature are clearly perceived through the things that have been made. And to start on any other foundation is to start on a faulty foundation, and to read life and interpret it by suppression, not by the truth. So I think it's a good encouragement to share the gospel that in that way, that that shows that that we're suppressing the truth about God when we ask those questions, when we actually sit there and say God hasn't shown himself to me. That's an act of suppressing that God's glory is all around us. God's glory is in the smallest of things and in the greatest of things, from bearing children to having a tasty meal. All these things glorify God. So I hope this was encouraging. Again, if asked that question, just stop and say, I believe you're on the wrong footing. That the real question is why don't we worship and praise God, given that he is manifestly and made himself known, and that all of creation is an indicative of him? And furthermore, implore others to come to Christ, that God has not left us here in our sin and in our suppression, but he has redeemed us through the cross, atoned for our sin and the transgression that separates us from him. That is actually the reason why we hide in our sin and hide from him, is because of that transgression. And until we accept Christ, we have no atonement for sin, and no way are we going to come out from hiding. We'll keep suppressing and suppressing. That's why we must just proclaim the gospel, and that God, by his Spirit and his grace, would restore them through that proclamation, through that word, through your life and through my life.